So today we're going to talk about discovering how low-code and pro-code development can accelerate application development. And I am Kartik Kanksabasan, one of the principal PMs in Power Platform, focused primarily on the developer tool support for low-code applications. So typically, our agenda will focus on the following. We'll try to unpack what exactly Fusion development is. And then subsequently focus on exactly the fact that all the kind of misnomers that we currently have around low-code development and the fact that it's not DevOps savvy and so on and so forth, and kind of dispel some of those functions there as we speak. And then in addition to that, talk about some of the capabilities that we're now bringing to bear and showcase some of those new capabilities that you can take advantage of today or right after Ignite. And then share with you some of the next steps and investments that we're making in order to further enrich that entire ALM journey that we're on in this broader context. Why low code? And that usually comes up on a regular basis. Well, when you look at the landscape, if you will, the number of software developers that are now going to be, we're reaching a point of finite resources when it comes to software developers. And now we have to expand the aperture to allow citizen developers to now partake in that entire ecosystem. And this is imperative because a lot of these organizations are right now in their digital transformation journey that need to realize value quicker, faster, and better. And as a matter of fact, we believe these are some of the statistics that we've seen so far. There's a changing dynamic in the workforce, and in the next 5 years, we're going to be building 500 million apps. That is more apps that have been built than in the last 40 years. And as I mentioned, software developers are a finite resource. We'll actually have 1 million software developers less to be able to go build this gargantuan task that's been imposed on us. Now, that's where low code comes in. Low code now allows organizations to be able to go ahead and unlock the innovation in the right way, and at the same time, widen the aperture of application development without losing speed and time to market. And that's where the notion of Fusion development comes in. Fusion development realizes the fact that we have code-first developers and in their respective environments, and then we have citizen developers or everyday developers that have tools like Power Platform that will build out these apps closer to the business, that is relevant to the business, and have to leverage the capabilities that these code-first developers provide. So for example, if I build a front-end app and if I can't connect directly back into the appropriate data resources, that app is absolutely useless. Likewise, from a code-first perspective, if I build a wonderful API, and if I don't have an app in the front end that actually makes sense of that API, then again, the back-end work that I've gone ahead and built is absolutely useless. So technically speaking, code-first developers and citizen developers actually need each other in any organization's digital transformation efforts that are currently underway. And when we talk about this in particular, the tooling that we're providing and that we'll talk about is how do we bridge the gap between code-first developers and citizen developers to realize innovation quicker, faster, and better in any organization as we move along. So the technical debt problem. Every time that we've talked about code-first development, the perception has always been the fact that code-first, low-code environments are not necessarily enterprise savvy and so on and so forth. A few of the things that we're going to be sharing later on today are some of the enterprise use cases that we've gone ahead and built. But the bottom line comes down to this. In the past, when we started off with something brand spanking new, the first year of application development, it's all great and fun, and we have all kinds of innovative things that we're currently doing. But as things progress throughout the years, the number of maintenance issues usurps the overall innovation agenda and kind of strangles the net innovation that a business would like to go do. By implementing low-code capability, you can now address these technical debt problems head on, quicker, faster, better, and still leave a lot of room for innovation as we move along. It comes down to essentially 4 key areas. First one is responsibility and control. So when it comes down to responsibility and control, one end of the spectrum is we have packaged apps. Here, your responsibility is less, but the control is less. In this case, the vendor has everything. So if there's a problem in the packaged app, well, all you have to do is call up a number, and the vendor goes ahead and does whatever they have to go do. On the other end is custom development, all right? And that's complete. You have complete responsibility and complete control over the environment and the capabilities that you want to go realize for your respective customers. With low-code capabilities like Power Platform, we kind of enable the ability to do this across the spectrum. We provide the ability to behave like a packaged app, but at the same time, you can also do custom development there as well. And also in the middle, you can leverage a bit of both. You can have some of the packaged app capabilities, but at the same time, have custom development capabilities there through things like Canvas app, model-driven app, through automated flows, through Power Automate, and so on and so forth. But the end is to be able to go ahead and straddle that sweet spot in the middle where you have enough custom development and enough package development to come up with applications that you want to go develop quicker, faster, and better. In addition to that, another angle of looking at this diagram is flipping the grid a different way. Again, you have the same set of constituents across the spectrum, except for the fact that you have creativity and structure. Now, I'm of the opinion of the fact that when you have structure, you empower creativity. So it's never a situation where in which you're doing creative work and you don't have structure. I'll give you an example. As a code first developer myself, I've gone ahead, whenever I start off something brand spanking new, I usually look at frameworks that are already there. And a lot of us who are creative essentially build on the shoulders of others that have tread the path before us as it is. So there's always some level of structure there. Likewise, again, packaged apps fall in the bottom end of the spectrum in the sense of more structure, less creativity because everything's packaged and so on and so forth. And then from that point on that gradient, on the other end of the spectrum is custom development. There's still a little bit of structure there, but you have a lot more creativity. And Power Platform enables you to pick your choice of comfort and go down that path in that trajectory and be able to deliver some of these capabilities in that context. This is all what is enabled through Fusion development, where you have certain class of developers that prefer more structure and probably want to be less creative in that context. Then there's a certain class of developers that want a little bit of both. And then there's a certain class of developers that want freedom, but have some structures that they can actually go ahead and build on quicker, faster, and better, and be able to realize a lot of the digital transformation innovation agenda. So with all this talk about Fusion development, let's get down to the brass tacks and kind of look at what kind of use cases enterprises have gone ahead and built using Power Platform and the Fusion tooling paradigm. So here are some use cases that we're going to talk about that showcase how digital transformation took a foot in a lot of these enterprises. The typical rubric that we have is that we have the Power Apps layer, which provides a low-code environment for rapid application development for line of business applications. We have the API management layer in the middle that allows us to use Power Apps and connect to the back-end resources that are, again, running on top of PaaS capabilities provided by Azure, running inside containers and so on and so forth. And that's kind of the paradigm that we'll start seeing across a lot of these enterprises from a digital transformation perspective. But there are more. You could even potentially have your resources running on-prem that could then have APIs that are being surfaced via Azure into the Power App or talking directly to the Power App. But a majority of the cases that we've seen so far usually traverse these three areas to realize their overall digital transformation processes. So here's an example of Xiaomi going ahead and taking one of their internal applications and making it available to their broader employees to be able to make just-in-time decisions. And as apropos, they call it Empower Employee. And in this case, what they've gone ahead and done is built a custom API on top of an internal data resource that is only available to their employees. And from that point on, they've built a set of functions and have these functions registered within Azure. And then in Azure, they've gone ahead and registered these individual functions as API endpoints. Now, the way the employees of Xiaomi interact with this app is through a Power Platform application. And in this context, the Power Platform application is then able to use custom connectors and communicate directly with the API gateway, which is API management, and then be able to provide the appropriate decision-making rubric for employees to take the right kind of decision to help their customer at their retail operations across China. And so that's one example of how innovation coupled with Power Apps and some of the back-end capabilities allowed Xiaomi to realize these personalized support capabilities that employees could provide when their customers ran into issues with their products and services. So here's an example where we have Priceline Australia, not Priceline US, because they're completely different businesses, but Priceline Australia is a grocery store chain, and they wanted to go ahead and build a multilingual website for personalized content for customers that wanted to go ahead and buy products and services through all the different Priceline retail outlets across the country. And in this case, they were able to go ahead and build these responsive websites by leveraging Power Platform, the application gateway, and the Azure AD B2C componentry, and build a safe way for their customers to interact with their products and services and be able to realize a lot of value in the sense of being able to bring in more customers, not only to their website, but also to their retail stores, and be able to see broader value for their entire supply chain in that context. So here's an example where we have an organization like American Airlines being able to pick up some of their legacy systems and be able to bring in some of that logic directly into their backend data stores, into Azure and Dataverse, and then in conjunction, build in AI models for leveraging being exposed through a Power App or through Power Virtual Agents to allow for better ground staff support at the various different airports that their staffs are responsible in servicing customers. And they wanted to go ahead and build these experiences from their legacy data store to bring in mobile experiences as well. So their staff can now interact with these applications, whether it be on a computer or whether it be on their mobile device. They're able to make sure they have a consistent view of the end-to-end customer journey when they're handling various different customer traffic at various different times throughout the year. And this way, they have a consistent experience and just-in-time information regarding how to service their customers better in the broader sense. So now we'll change gears a little bit. All right, and we know when it comes to Fusion development, there's a lot of attention that's being paid to the citizen side because it's just drag and drop. It's like literally taking a PowerPoint deck and then making an application out of it. How cool is that? But then, in order to make Fusion development really work, there are elements that we need to provide to the code first developer, or pro developer as we call them, right? And there's been a significant investment that we've been doing on the Power Platform side to make that life easy for the pro developer to be able to interact and build more productive applications, Power Platform applications across the board for the enterprise in their digital transformation journey. Now, to that effect, when we started down this continuum of actually building better support for pro developers, we kind of looked at the kind of the tooling landscape that we already had provided. And it turned out the fact that it became really hard for pro developers to know where to start. And so to that effect, we now have gone ahead and simplified that entire interface to something called as the Power Platform command line. This happens to be a little bit of a misnomer because what it is essentially is a common interface that allows us to build a whole set of integrations on top of it. One of the incarnations of this interface happens to be a command line interface. And it is the basis and the crux of a lot of the other integrations that we enable. So for example, when we start looking at integrating this with Azure DevOps or with GitHub Actions, or for that matter, the Visual Studio Code integration that we announced as public preview early in the year, it is integrated directly with this Power Platform CLI. In short, we call this the PAC CLI. The other beautiful thing about this entire command line interface is the fact that it's already multi-platform. So whether you have code-first developers developing on Windows, Mac, or Linux, we can work on all three. And you can still be able to build these Fusion applications quicker, faster, better, and deploy them to various different environments, regardless of what environment that you start off or what OS platform that you're on. So here's an example of how the interface looks like. So here's an example of one of the features that we talked about, or shared rather, early in the year, was the ability to unpack Canvas apps in a source code friendly format. Well, the fact is, here you have a Visual Studio Code interface. And in this case, I've gone ahead and unpacked a Canvas application in a pure YAML format. And this is a text-friendly format that now allows you pro developers to kind of understand exactly what's going on inside a Canvas app. Imagine a scenario where we have a citizen developer that has to go ahead and debug a regular expression. And they can't seem to figure out the head or tail of exactly where the regular expression may be going wrong. Now, when a pro developer who actually understands regular expressions a little bit better than a citizen developer can now look at that same Canvas app in an environment that is friendly to them and decipher exactly what may be going wrong in that regular expression, that's what this actually enables from a Fusion development perspective. So that's something that we've surfaced. And again, as you can see, it is all native within that environment. A code-first developer does not have to step out of that environment to go work in an environment that's completely alien to them. Now, we've taken the step of this thing a little bit further to now providing the same capability in a cross-platform context. And what that is that now, as I mentioned, early on, the fact that we were available on Windows, Mac, and Linux, we also now support WSL, right? So users that are running on Windows and now want to run Ubuntu or Debian or whatever version of Linux that they want to go run, they can now instantiate VS Code directly in those environments and use WSL services and work on those WSL workspaces directly through VS Code using the Power Platform integration as such. In addition to that, earlier this year, GitHub announced Codespaces. What's so cool about that capability is the fact that you can now, without requiring to install anything on your machine, or if you're using a tablet, you can go to the GitHub website and author your applications directly through the web UI. And with the new Power Platform command line, we now integrate directly into GitHub Codespaces. So again, in that context, you don't have to actually install, download anything. You can just literally go on the web page, open up Codespaces, initiate the Power Platform extension, and you're off the races. So let's take a look at this here. So here I've got my GitHub repo, all right, and I've got files and everything else there. What I'm now going to go do is I'm going to go ahead and start off by creating a code space. And all I do in this case is click on code. And instead of selecting to clone the repo, I'm going to go create a new code space instance. And here it goes ahead and instantiates a container that has VS Code running natively. The first thing I'm going to go do is I'm going to go into the extensions activity plane. And from there, go ahead and search for Power Platform. So again, I'll go ahead here, type Power Platform. And when I do that, it will list out all the Power Platform extensions. As you can see, right there, the third one is where the Power Platform is. And again, now look at the difference. Typically, when you install extensions, it just says install. But in this case, it actually understands that you're installing this into Codespaces. And once you do that, it then goes ahead and sets up the entire environment ready for you and good to go. And as you can see over there on the activity panel, you now have an icon there that highlights the Power Apps integration. Now, let's go back into our typical use case here. We're now going to go into our terminal session, create a directory called solutions, all right, and also create a directory called controls. And this is where we'll keep our solutions and controls from a Power App perspective, all right? And what I'm going to go do now is go ahead and pick up a solution from my dev environment in Power Platform and export it onto my workspace here in GitHub. All right. So again, it starts off the export process. It says export succeeded, and it generates a whole bunch of files there is. And guys, if you look on the corner at the top there with 36, it's actually all the files that I had in my solution are now there available in my Git repo. Okay. So now again, I've gone ahead and I can see the fact that I've got files that are there. So in this case, here's a JSON file that shows some of the connectors that I've got. All right. Now let's do something more fancy here, right? We're now going to go look at, besides just looking at some of these functions, we also want to go ahead and create controls, because that's what a lot of developers do. They also want to go create their own UI controls in Power Apps. Do we support that? Well, here's an example. I'm going to go into my controls folder, create a test control, and now when I go ahead and initialize that directory, it downloads all the relevant Node.js files that I need from the NPM repository. All right. And here I've just got a plain simple PCF control, which will now allow me to go look at exactly what I'm doing. So again, I'm just doing your regular developer Node.js stuff. So I'm just fixing up my my repository, and along with that, I'm going to go ahead and now it tells me that I have to actually go update my Node.js instance. So again, I'll just quickly go do that and see how fast this whole process is. Because nothing is actually running locally on my machine, it's all hitting off of the server itself. All right, now that we've got that and we've got our PCF control set up, what I'm now going to go do is build it, make sure it's working properly. And here I see the fact that it's running properly as it is. And what I'm also now going to do is I want to make sure that it's actually it actually works. So for example, typically when I do my PCF work, there are two files that are in question. So here's the index.typescript file that has some componentry of UI. So this is, again, it's an empty shell right now. All I'm trying to go do is demonstrate the fact that I can do some PCF work. So all I'm going to do here is, in this case, just start it, just to show you the fact that I can now, just like the way I would on my own workstation, start this PCF control. And look, as soon as I do that, I can now look at my PCF control right in the Power Apps Component Framework test environment. So my custom code components in this case are now available. And as you can see, it's running within my own my browser here. All right, and there we go. Now what I'm gonna do is, just like any other developer, add that PCF control to my solution. All right, and go ahead and run a build. Then import that directly into my Power Platform environment. All right. Once that is done, I go back into my Power Platform environment, look at my test solution, and there you can see all the things that I just updated are now pushed into my Power Platform environment as it is, including that new PCF control that I just added. Isn't that cool? All right. Now we'll go do some stuff with Git. All right, because it has to be committed. Even though it's running off the server, I still have to commit changes into GitHub. Once I do that, all my changes are now committed and are showing up in my repository. All right, and then from that point on, now I can go onto my native machine, let's say opening it up in WSL, and do the exact same thing that I just did on the browser. So in this case, I have WSL running locally on my machine. And what I'm going to do first is, now that I've cloned the repo, I run a build and I get all these errors. And I wonder why that's a problem. Well, it's because I haven't actually gone ahead and installed all the dependencies locally on my machine. So I'm going to go install the dependencies again here. And these are just typical Node.js development functions that we end up doing. All right. I'm going to run and build it. So there we go, to make sure everything's working properly. All right. And remember, before I ran the build, it was failing. Now it works just fine. And then I'll go ahead and do an npm start. And the same experience that we had when we ran this entire piece on Codespaces, I get that exact same experience out of WSL. And WSL is smart enough to realize that it's actually running inside WSL and invoke the appropriate browser session that needs to happen. And again, I can go ahead and run a .NET build, make the changes in my new solution that I've got, and push these changes directly back into my Git repository as it is. And so that covers our entire experience, our developer experience from a tooling perspective, where we try to keep the developer in the environment they're comfortable in, so that they can actually go ahead and still interact in a very constructive way from a Fusion development context with their citizen development community. Now, the typical notion is that when we start looking at low code, the notion and the idea of DevOps the perception is that may not apply. Well, that's far from the truth. As a matter of fact, most enterprises that actually deploy low code leverage capabilities like DevOps to make sure they can manage and have a lifecycle management construct around how they deploy and consume low code applications. And to that effect, we've been actually working diligently with such enterprises and incorporating some of those capabilities directly into our Power Platform environment. So now we actually offer full-blown support where developers can integrate directly with GitHub or Azure DevOps and implement agile processes and governance models on top of low-code applications. And in conjunction with that, we've now built in capabilities like tasks inside Azure DevOps or GitHub Actions directly in those environments to support this notion of continuous integration and continuous delivery. So this allows not only low-code applications to be deployed using DevOps constructs, but also be part of that entire DevOps paradigm that may already be in place in in large organizations that are going through their entire digital transformation processes. So here's an example, a screenshot of the Azure DevOps support that we've currently got. And in this case here, as a matter of fact, the GitHub Actions capability, we GA'd directly in June. And then we've now, our DevOps support has been out for nearly a year now. But every month, we usually add more and more function. And the most recent function that we just added, based on customer feedback, is the ability to use Linux runners as part of your DevOps pipeline. In the past, you could only use Windows runners to go ahead and build Power Platform applications through a CI/CD pipeline. Now, because we have support for cross-platform, we can now use Linux runners directly in that context. The other thing, as I mentioned early on too, is the fact that all these tasks under the covers use that same exact Power Platform command line to execute a lot of these functions and capabilities. So as we bring in changes into that command line interface, it immediately permeates directly into a lot of these CI/CD constructs that we currently have. Now, that said, there's the other part of this equation as well. We can go ahead and build applications and so on and so forth, but we also need to be able to consume applications or build applications that consume APIs in a proper way. And one of the things that we've been working closely with is with our Azure API management team. So Azure API management, think of Azure API management as an API gateway. And what that does is it actually allows an organization to go register all the different APIs that they've currently got in this API gateway. And then from there, we can now orchestrate connectors directly. So if there's an API that we now want to go ahead and use within a Power App, we can now just do so directly from the Azure experience. And so now customers don't have to have a separate experience where they go and register an API inside API management, then come off of that experience, go into Power Platform, and then create the new connector separately. We have now melded those experiences together and allow customers to create the appropriate Power Platform API, or connector rather, directly from API management. So let's look at exactly how this experience looks like. Let's start off with GitHub Actions, all right? So I'm going to, again, go back to my Codespace instance, all right, where I've gone ahead and built the artifact. So again, just for grins and giggles, I'm going to go ahead and commit those changes, my solution changes directly into a folder. So again, I'll go build it. So here I am building the artifact in question. So again, I'll do a .NET build. And what this will do is create a zip file. This zip file is still unmanaged, by the way. And the difference between a managed and unmanaged zip file is the fact that an unmanaged zip file is usually susceptible to changes and things like that, whereas a managed zip file is an immutable object. So typically when we deploy an application in production, we deploy a managed file. So what I'm doing here right now is I'm just going ahead and checking in my built file, my unmanaged zip solution file directly into Git. And then we're going to use this to go deploy into my build environment, run some tests, and then from there, generate a managed solution file, and then put that into production. So what I'm going to go do now is literally go into my marketplace. And as I go into marketplace and search for Power Platform, I see Power Platform actions. And right there itself, I have a set of steps on exactly how to enable these actions directly into my Git repo. So to that effect, how I run these actions is, again, going into actions. And as you can see, I've had previous runs of that particular operation. I'm going to go ahead and select that I'm going to deploy off the main branch, the folder from which I'm going to be taking that zip file and deploying into my various different environments. So now I'm going to kick off that build. And if I'm going to click on that release solution task, that's the workflow that's running, I see I've got two tasks in there. One is called convert to manage. The other one's called release solution. So under convert to manage, I see the fact that it's actually going ahead and importing the changes that I just committed to right into my build environment. And here it's again using the service principal auth, logging in, importing the work, and then from there, when it's done properly, it's going to export out a managed version, right? And now it's releasing all that directly, taking that managed version and deploying it to my production environment. And again, here, same thing applies. It again authenticates. And again, here, it's importing that particular zip file directly into my prod environment so that it can be validated by customers as the case may be. And again, when we put this artifact in our build environment or /test environment, we're just assuming the fact that testing has already happened and it passed the test. Now let's look at the YAML file in particular. So when we create these actions are essentially YAML files, our text files. And here I've defined a bunch of variables that are required for us to go run this workflow properly. All right. I can specify that it can run on Windows or you can run on Ubuntu. And then I'm using a bunch of environment variables that I specified there earlier in the YAML file and posted them directly over here. So I don't have to hard code everything once. All I have to do is provide the relevant properties there.
So here we're going to start off by first modifying a piece of code, a function that we want to go publish as an API. And again, I'm going to right click in my Visual Studio environment and hit publish. Select the appropriate Azure resources. And in this case, I'm going to select it as Windows because we're going to run this function natively within Azure as Windows. Select the Xiaomi resources because this happens to be Xiaomi's Empower Employee API. And then select the appropriate API management gateway under which the API would be now registered. So in this case, we'll select Empower Employee function, hit finish, and now we have a publishing profile. We'll then proceed to go ahead and hit publish. Once the publishing is done, we then go into the Azure portal, and there we look at the Xiaomi Resources API Gateway, and there we see our API listed. And we're going to go ahead and test it to make sure that it's actually returning the values that we expect. So we're going to hit send. And now we see the fact that it's actually sending us information that's pertinent to our the API function that we wanted to go deliver. Now from here, what we're going to go do is create the appropriate connector within Power Platform. So here again, we select the API, provide the appropriate target environment, and then hit create. That now goes ahead and creates the appropriate connector within Power Platform. So we go into the data section and look at custom connectors, and there we have it. We now have the Empower Employee function listed there. Again, similar to what we have in API management, you have various different tabs that you can go look at. Security, definition, code, and test. We're interested in the test part, so we're going to go ahead and test it and make sure it looks the exact same way as it did on API management. And here we have the data that's being returned, identical to what was being returned on API management, and that now is ready to be wired up into the appropriate application.
We next saw the fact that we could use GitHub Actions to go deploy solutions into various different environments. In addition to that, we saw how we can generate author functions within Visual Studio, publish them into API management, and then from within API management, go create the appropriate connectors that can be used to wire up applications inside Power Apps. Now, from a roadmap perspective, to support this broader application lifecycle management construct with Power Platform, there are a lot of things that are exciting things that we're going ahead and building. For example, as I mentioned, the capability that we just shared with Codespaces, right after Ignite, it'll be available for public preview for you to try out and kind of give us feedback. We hope to keep the public preview window short so we can GA this really quickly, but we also want to make sure that you get a chance to kind of get your hands dirty with this new functionality. In addition to that, we'll officially, once we get the pieces all lined up with Codespaces, we will also GA the VS Code integration as we speak. In addition to that, we also announced connection references support as public preview early in the year. And our goal is to also make that generally available for users like yourself. Some of the other things that we're currently going ahead and doing, being able to go ahead and update existing apps by leveraging connection references and environment variables, and make that part of the deployment pipeline as it is. Some of the futuristic investments that we're doing right now is also providing the ability to create custom connectors and treat them as code-first components. So not only can you look at PCF, but you can actually now create custom connectors directly through the VS Code IDE or Visual Studio and deploy them in conjunction with how you go ahead and deploy those apps, as it were. In addition to that, we're also bringing in capabilities for supporting Dataverse applications for teams. So being able to package applications accordingly and then deploying them into the various different target environments as such. And then from an automation perspective, for example, when I'm deploying apps, and if my app depends on applications that are there sitting inside AppSource, those applications would be deployed as a predicate before my app gets deployed because they're explicitly dependent. My app is explicitly dependent on such applications as it is. And also bringing in some of the portal actions, so Power Apps portal functions directly into the CI/CD pipeline. Further things that I'd like you guys to go try out. Well, one, please take a look at the ALM support that we've already been building. We continuously go ahead and enrich these ALM capabilities within Power Platform. In addition to that, if you want to go ahead and do the same things that I just demoed here, we have the Power Platform Actions Lab, which has a set of functions that you can go ahead and go implement. So please try that out and give us feedback. In addition, from a Fusion development context, a lot of the constructs that I shared here pretty much enrich that experience from a Fusion development perspective. And we actually have an ebook out that talks about how to go around the journey of Fusion development in that context. We've also built a lot of learning collateral and artifacts around Fusion development that I'd really like for you folks to try out. And if you're interested in trying out the build tools from Azure DevOps or the GitHub Actions, these are the links provided for those are also here as well. So my only ask here is go ahead and give it a shot. And again, we're always open to feedback. whether it be through our the Power Apps community, whether it's through the direct sites. So all these links actually have a feedback section there that we will constantly monitoring and responding back to that, back to you folks through those various different channels. So there are multiple ways for you to get back to us and give us your feedback. Honest feedback is highly appreciated. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for your time. And I'm eagerly looking forward to your feedback and working along with you in your Fusion development journey.